you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm here this evening on behalf of constituents who continue to suffer unacceptable delays and cancelled services when simply trying to travel on the Govia Thameslink Railway network. Many across the network suffer daily difficulties getting into work, with some employees now facing disciplinary action and others missing precious family time in the evenings because they are stuck on platforms. As a daily commuter to London, I know this all too well myself. This has been the case for almost 12 months now. I thank honourable and right honourable members from all sides of the House for their attendance at this hour, and I also wish to express my gratitude to the new Rail Minister and to publicly thank him for coming to Tree Bridges Station in Crawley, which was one of the first visits that he undertook following his deserved appointment in July. As honourable and right honourable members across the Chamber will be only too aware, all of our constituents who travel on this network are affected by this matter. Mr. Speaker, the cross-party nature of this issue is underlined by the composition of the all-party parliamentary group on Southern Rail, set up in this Parliament in the interests of passengers. The cross-party work of this group is shown by who is co-chairing it. My right honourable friend, the member for Mid Sussex, and the honourable member for Hove and Portslade. On the 11th of July, 341 services on the Govia Thameslink network were removed. This was to counter the disruption which resulted from the so-called staff sickness situation at the time. Last week, on the 5th of December, 119 of these services were reinstated. However, Sussex passengers have yet to see any benefit. And on the same day, the Minister stated, and I quote, "The remaining trains will be reinstated to the timetable incrementally in the coming weeks." Mr. Speaker, this is of course welcome news. But is the Minister therefore able to offer any further update with regard to the discussions he has had on the matter with both GTR and Network Rail? I'm also grateful to representatives from GTR for coming to Crawley and speaking at a public meeting I organised in front of an audience of over 150 constituents in August. This meeting came a few weeks before the government announced a package of measures, which I welcome, to improve the resilience of the Southern network, including a £20 million fund. Mr. Speaker, at that meeting in Crawley, one of the GTR's representatives told us how the new franchise had struggled to make a profit. The following week, it was announced that GTR's parent company, Go Ahead, posted a profit of around £100 million. A number of my constituents have, quite understandably, asked me in recent days why it is taxpayers who are paying for the £20 million of improvement works announced in the last fortnight. I'd be grateful if the Minister could address this point, particularly with regard to any discussions he may have had with the company in this regard.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Of course I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend and congratulate him on yet again debating probably the most debated train operating company in the country, and echo his words of welcome for the greater sense of urgency the new Minister has taken. But doesn't he agree with me, given the profits recently announced by the parent company and the considerable amount of revenues in this company, that at the very least those many thousands of passengers, particularly the season ticket holders, our constituents, should have some significant compensation when they're renewing their season tickets to go some way from making up for the shambles of the service they've had to suffer for the last 12 months?
Well, my honourable friend, the member for East Worthing-Shoreham, anticipates a couple of the points that I will come on to raise in a few moments, but I essentially agree with him that the cost of season ticket holders in particular, I think, is something that the Department for Transport needs to look at when it comes to the new year. And also, I will come on to mention, I think, the need for more swift compensation for those passengers who have been adversely affected. Of course, as well as the £20 million of investment, the government have also announced a new project board. The Department for Transport have said that this is to achieve a rapid improvement in the service, and I sincerely hope that this means we will see benefits in the weeks ahead rather than in months to come. I would be delighted to give that.
I'm grateful to him for giving way and congratulate him on getting this important debate. As he says, he's speaking for all of our constituents whose lives are being wrecked by the incompetence of this rail company. But on that new project board, would you agree with me that it might do better if it had more representatives from passengers who feel locked out from many of the decisions that are being taken? I understand there's only going to be one passenger on that particular board.
Grateful to the Honourable Lady, the Member for Brighton Pavilion for intervening, and I would like to pay tribute to her about the cross-party way that members in this House are seeking to address this issue. And again, she anticipates a matter that I will be coming onto. I think that greater passenger representation I think is very important, as indeed, as I mentioned, reporting back to us, the elected representatives in this House. And while the project board will see greater working together between GTR and Network Rail, may I separately say that I hope the Minister will additionally work to facilitate talks between GTR and the RNT, rather than the continuation of the current situation where the union undertake further strikes and cause even more misery for passengers. I'm sure that colleagues on all sides of the House will welcome confirmation that there will be, as the Honourable Lady from Brighton Pavilion has said, a passenger representative on this review board. But one thing that I and members on all sides of the House continue to try to do is to ensure that the voices of our constituents are heard as this situation goes on. And I trust, as I said a few moments ago, that an elected representative will be part of the process, as indeed will be greater passenger representation. I welcome the new project board reporting on a weekly basis to my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, and my honourable friend, the Rail Minister. And in turn, I'd appreciate assurances that ministers will accordingly update the House with regard to the progress of the board. I was pleased.
My honourable friend give way.
I'd be delighted.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for once again bringing this issue to the floor of the House. Does my honourable friend agree with me that even though our passengers are being failed by GTR and Southern at the moment, going back to the status quo is no longer acceptable either? When the service is running at full capacity, my constituents on the Uckfield line have to suffer a line which is called a misery line, so even the status quo isn't good enough.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for the intervention from my right honourable friend, the lady from Wilden, because she has been a very firm campaigner on behalf of her constituents, and indeed others, a doughty campaigner, my honourable friend also says, from a sedentary position, as usual. She's been a very doughty campaigner on behalf of people beyond Wilden, but indeed across East Sussex, as well as myself in West Sussex too. I was pleased to see the new Rail Minister provide a written ministerial statement on the issue of GTR when the session reconvened earlier this month, and I hope that he will continue to update colleagues in writing and, of course, in person. As part of the £20 million Improvement Fund, additional staff will be hired at all stations, including at East Croydon, as well as at Gatwick Airport, which, of course, that station being located within my constituency. And I understand there will also be a £1 million fund spent on testing platform and dispatch staff infrastructure at these stations. Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, for being rather parochial, but please would the Minister provide an update on a timetable for staff hire and equipment testing at Gatwick Airport station. I hope that these improvements will reduce the need for my constituents, with continuing exasperation, I might add, to use the delay repay system. On the issue of compensation, as I was mentioning in response to my honourable friend, the member for Worthing East, on the issue of compensation for passengers, let me be clear, it is not a solution in itself, but improving compensations procedures and making the process simpler for passengers is important in the short term. I very much welcome reading the letter placed in the library of the House from the Rail Minister to the Chair of the Transport Select Committee, the Honourable Member for Liverpool Riverside, dated the 6th of September, where the Minister wrote, and I quote, "Rail customers should not be denied any consumer rights or protections, even for a temporary period, while the rail industry works to put in place more consistent compensation arrangements between rail operators." Mr. Speaker, the previous Rail Minister, my honourable friend, the member for Devizes, said in June that the government, and again I quote, are committed to improving compensation arrangements for passengers. We expect to make an announcement on this in the next few months. Mr. Speaker, following a previous announcement in the 2015 autumn spending review that passengers will soon have access to compensations when trains are over 15 minutes late, on behalf of my constituents who have described to me their frustration when they experience a delayed train and often miss out on compensation